Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. At home, as usual, recording these podcasts, sat at the piano. Hopefully, the dogs are going to behave themselves. 99% of the time, they do, and I don't often mention them. If you listen to this regularly, they have had a mention in the past, and usually when I mention them, that is the curse. Will strike that somebody will ring the doorbell and we'll hear from them. But they're all being good at the moment, and maybe that's indicative of the attention that they want to give to today's guest. I've just been speaking to our guest off air about some of the questions that we sort of put forward in advance, some of the talking points, and where we may go with today's conversation. But broadly speaking, we're going to be talking a little bit about event strategy. We're all aware of the importance of event strategy. If you fail to develop one, it's unlikely the experience will really strike a chord with the attendees and the people who are attending your event. Developing a strategy is the sum of many parts. And for today's guest, insights and analysis are at the forefront here. So I'm delighted to say that joining us today is the Managing Director of Sledge, Sarah Yeats. Sarah, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
In your excellently appointed sort of podcast, professional studio, fully on brand. If you're listening to today's podcast, please do head over to eventinternews.com and watch the video version, and you'll see the fully on brand studio that Sarah joins us from today. As we've got the brand right behind you, maybe the best place to start today, Sarah, is telling our listeners a little bit about Sledge and what it is that you do as a business.
Yep. So we're a live experience and film agency. So look after everything, beginning to end, all across the whole event and film side of things. That's us.
And when you say filming, are you doing live streaming of events? Are you doing filming and post production of video content for events? How does the filming side of things work?
Yeah, all of the above. So film, it was always like an add-on, I suppose, to some of our events, and then essentially it's become over the years a core offering. So all the content involved within elements, whether that's stings or kind of small short videos, etc. And then also all the post-production side, on-site shooting, that side of things. So the exciting stuff.
Well, and what does it tend to be? Some companies like you have a maybe a niche or a certain sector of the industry that they work in. Is that true for you, or do you work with quite a broad spectrum? Could you give us an idea of some of the type of events that you work alongside and for?
Yeah, no, quite broad spectrum. We don't tend to go with one sector necessarily. We are across those, so across tech, across finance, across the fashion side of the world as well. And then we do everything from kind of like awards or conferences to round tables, on-site shooting, that side of things. So yeah.
And what about yourself and your role? You're the managing director of Sledge. Was it a company that you founded, or have you worked through the business to the position that you're in at the moment?
Yeah, worked through the business. So I've been here for I think about 12 years now. So came in as an account director and now the MD. So looking after the business, looking after the strategy for us and everyone else, and the team involved. So.
And I mentioned at the top of the recording today that we were going to be talking about event strategy and how failing to develop one can really be the downfall of any event. Is having a genuine strategy and a written strategy something that is still overlooked in sort of 2024 where we are? Do a lot of events just assume that they kind of know what they want and they don't actually have it pointed on paper?
Yeah, definitely overlooked. And I think it's because I think there's often a situation where it's thought that it's there, or there's an understanding that's there. But when you're in a business, when you're in, looking at an event, or you've been involved in it for a long time, it can be hard to have that outside in view. And I think that's what's forgotten. We often get very short briefs. We often get very long briefs. But when you start to pick everything apart, that detail that you're looking for to really kind of get into the bones of it isn't always there. And that's where we come in to kind of help unpick that and really ask those questions as to what it all means, or the detail. I think a lot of the time you can get in kind of like corporate speak as well, which is great when you're in
Yeah.
it. But when you're not in it, I don't understand it, lots of acronyms, things like that. But what does it actually mean? And kind of that honesty behind it is where it doesn't always come across, I suppose.
ROI springs to
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
It's just a straight one that kind of leaps out and whacks me in the face with a sledgehammer. But I mean, from a strategy point of view, again, it's a term that in itself can, I suppose, frighten some people. If you just sit down with a client and opposite them, and meet them for the first time and say, okay, what's your strategy? And I suppose it can be quite an intimidating thing if you've never really looked at it properly before. How would you lead a client in terms of it to form a strategy?
I think you're right. I think not everyone, I think when you say strategy, everyone's like, oh, we've got to understand the full strategy of the whole business, what that means. And what they're actually saying is we just want to do an event and it's related to this. And I think that's what it is. It's about breaking down those barriers and really understanding and asking the why, so we can truly understand that why. Like, why are we doing this event? What is it you want to get out of it? What are those um, solutions you're looking for, or what are those outcomes you're kind of looking for? And just having a conversation, really, like just having, tell me, I know nothing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
not
yeah.
this way. We look into your business, but what is it you're truly trying to achieve here? I think that's the real key. You've got to really understand the why so that they can become the drivers to whatever those solutions become.
Hmm. What about asking those same questions of their attendees? Is that something that again is overlooked? Because as much as you want to sit with an event organizer and a client and say, why are you organizing this event? I guess in some respects this is important to ask their attendees, why are you attending this?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's something, it is massively overlooked. It's definitely become, depends who you're working with, how
Hmm.
open they are to it. I think also it's something that people can be quite scared of, which is not the right thing to do, I don't think. In that sense, I think they feel like they're kind of opening a whole other thing, and how do we manage this? How do we concentrate with this, etc. But I think getting those insights from your people is essential to kind of create that strategy, because what they're doing is just giving that honest insight. And what they're doing is, a lot of the time, when you work for a larger organization or any organization, you aren't always aware of how you and your day-to-day always fits in with the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But what they ask is, what you do, you do it really well, and that's great and that's brilliant, but how it goes wider isn't so sure. So that's where we come in, I suppose, and help with that. Is that we gather those insights, we build that through various tools, through various methods of doing it, and then we're going to get that fuller picture, that more honest picture, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, and I guess two words that always spring out to me when you're talking to a client is inspire and educate. I think a lot of events tend to, it's certainly sort of business led events, will fall into one of those or have an element of both, and they're the two that kind of jump out the most regularly to me, that I hear from people. Well, we want people to come in and be inspired, or we want people to come in and leave having been educated in new ideas and new ways, and trying to continually sort of reinvent and understand what inspiration is and what education is, and how the two of them can be interlinked in the events world, I think is pretty important. Just I was curious today to ask you whether or not that those two words crop up regularly in your world.
All the time. It's inspire, great. But what does that mean? And that means so many different things to different
Mm,
people. And is it is it in my day-to-day job? Is it for me personally? Is it everything else? And I think that's what does that mean to you, and what it means to different people is very interesting to hear. And I think it's quite, when you say that word inspire or educate, even educate, which you kind of think would be quite simple to understand,
mm,
to have that clear parameters, but then it always leads to something else. So um, really pinning that down and kind of understand what that means, and that can mean many things to the various stakeholders, or whoever's involved. But it's trying to understand where the level of importance is for each of those, and what, again, like what those drivers are. Is that why it's that real sort of crunch point, which can be difficult. Yeah, I think inspire and educate become buzzwords.
Yeah.
Bit like let's be more digital. Um,
What does what does that mean? You know,
yeah,
and you only say that because you've had a client say that to you. We want to be more digital.
mm,
Well, in what respect?
yeah,
How? But I'm going to guess that some of them actually, when you actually say, well, in what respect? Well, we're not quite sure. We just know that we need to be more digital.
yeah. We just need to be more digital. And then you kind of go, okay, great. So you make some suggestions, or you go, why? And they don't really know, which just means it doesn't have that level of importance, right? It's just a word.
Mm,
And there's other, we can make it seemingly digital, or we can make it educational or inspiring, but it's trying to kind of create that, I suppose, golden thread, that red thread throughout it, to kind of go, this means this, which gives you, why, and this is the
yeah.
experience. It's got to have an experience. It's got to have a purpose, right? So yeah.
How would it? What are some of the sort of physical manifestations of options that you would give to a client that says, "I want to be more digital"? You know, what immediate questions would you ask of them straight away when you hear that?
Well, do you want to do that does that mean you want to do a live stream? A lot of time it will come, we want to do it, we're doing a in-person event and we
Mm,
want to be more digital. And you're like, okay, well, they jar nicely. But also, does that mean in terms of what we put on the screen, do we want that more engaging in the sense of, do we want people to interact with that? So do we use apps? Do we have real-time effects? Is that purely through like different forms of film,
mm.
video, or that sort of thing? Um, and it is quite funny. You do get kind of met by a bit like, "Ah, we didn't know." And then also like, I thought, that's, you tell us. It's like, okay, well, we've got to go back a few steps. We need to work this out as to why we're doing it. What it means.
Yeah, and operationally, you know, a client. Well, we want to be more digital. We want our audiences. You know, let's break it down to something really simple. We want them to use their smartphones to ask questions, or we want them to do X, Y, Z. And instead of having a printed, conference brochure this year, everything's going to be sort of an accessible PDF. We're going to use QR. Great. What's the connect? And then that throws up all the operational questions like, what's the connectivity like in the building?
Yeah,
And you know, it's that knock-on effect and that chain of events that sort of showcases to people who work in the industry the understanding that everything is interlinked. Saying
yeah,
that you want something to be more digital has a potential impact on so many other operational elements.
yeah. That's it. And I think, and also it comes down to budget as well, right? Which is always the key thing. And it's trying to understand what that main driver is. Is being digital the main thing? Um, Educational is always part of it, but is that what it is, or is it the experience? Is it people going away with something, feeling different, an emotion or a learning or something? And I think all those things come into play. But yeah, you're right, that's kind of where we come in to kind of help understand the level of importance of those various things. We always want
Mm,
to bring them to, like, we obviously want to, it's our job, we're creative, that's what we want to do, we want to make it creative, we want to make it engaging, we want to
mm.
make it like that standard stuff. You don't have to tell us that. But like how and where we can do that and how far we can push it as well is also quite interesting. I think, another buzz, can be like, we want to be really creative, what does that mean? um and then you kind of see where the levels can be quite different in terms of like, oh, okay, we want to go, we want to take it all outside, we want to do something completely different, we want to kind of put this on a, top of a building, and they go, oh, maybe not that much. Like,
Yeah,
but within our
yeah, yeah,
conference room.
yeah. Within this space, I mean, on the subject of sort of buzzwords and words that organisers will perhaps come to you with sustainability,
Yeah,
accessibility, diversity, that they're all very much interlinked at the moment. The sustainability conversation has evolved really well in the last 2 or 3 years, particularly where we're understanding that sustainability now is not just about our eco practices, our carbon footprint, etc., but sustainability is also our diversity and our inclusion. Our particular strategies around accessibility, whether that be physically or mental accessibility at a particular event. I'm guessing these are all things that are being driven towards you as well by clients at the moment because they know that they've got to do something about it. And again, in a similar way to we want to be more digital, they'll throw this at you maybe with limited idea of how they actually achieve it.
yeah, definitely. And I think also because they're all they're all subjects that are hugely important, and they all have a part to play, but it's understanding where they have a part to play and what means to you. And I think often what we find is that, for sustainability, for example, the policy that the business has, or the outward messaging as such, isn't always connected to the event. It's something that often gets talked about, but isn't also necessarily the highest priority, or
Mm.
necessarily what it means. And like you say, that could be environmental, that could be social, that could be governance. It depends where you want that to be. And I think that's, where we support that, is we're kind of looking at, what those policies are, understanding them, because we do understand them, but then kind of trying to build that in. I think they often, like reporting as another part of it. We need to report on it, or what are our KPIs, etc. And it's but what that means and how that means is quite difficult,
Mm.
because it can be so broad. So again, it's trying to break that down to go, what this solution, having it on this platform or in this place or in this environment, leads to, supports us in this way of thinking. We have a measurement tool internally for sustainability, which we call our environmental sustainability action plan. So we essentially can go, this is the event, we've put it together, we understand it, but actually, if by doing X action, this will improve your social impact, or this will improve your carbon, etc. So do you want to do it? So it becomes a conversation again, and again
Mm.
starts to build that strategy piece back around, because you're kind of building it, as you're going as well, rather than having it like laid out, because you'll have that brief in the first place, but like we said, the strategy isn't always necessarily there, or there's lots of strains to the strategy. So it's understanding which one has that priority and which one we want to go with, because it's going to have the biggest impact at the end of the event for what we're measuring it against as well.
Sure. I'm certain that every organizer will say, our event is unique. As somebody who is working on behalf of those event organizers to actually deliver, the physical manifestation of the event, and that includes, things like streaming and putting it out into the digital world, it still requires your input there. How truly unique are they, is there an identity to your own business and to Sledge, that when you deliver an event, there will always be certain sort of hallmarks, if you will, that you can see, right, that identifies that as an event that we've worked on, both in the pre-planning and the execution?
I think our team and our values is the behind the scenes stuff that brings that unique value. Knowing that you've got all of that support,
Mm.
here's another buzzword, more, your extension of your team, essentially, those who understand you. That's what we offer. And I think having that, knowing that you are that safe pair of hands to be able to take you through it, I think that gives you, it's not necessarily that unique way of a unique way of working, I think, is what we have, but I don't think it's always delivered in that was a completely creative, different something else, because it's not always the requirement. It's nice to
Mm.
say it and nice to feel it, but I don't think it's always what's happened. And what I'd love to do is be able to just go to everyone, go, well, this was what we started with and this is what we finished with. And then
Mm.
that's where the uniqueness, that's where the creativity comes, that's where the excitement came from. And
Mm.
because it wasn't what we thought it was going to be.
And I guess by having a clearly defined strategy in the first place, must put you in a better position to then analyze after the event, how things went, and it must give you some better sort of KPIs and an indication as to what you actually achieved.
Yeah, definitely. It gives that honesty behind it as well, like that true. We know it makes sure that we're aligned throughout the whole piece, because we know we're doing X because of the piece of the strategy that we've defined. So it's kind of like, that's the KPI we're trying to work to. This is why we're doing it. It aligns with your process, your policies, whatever it is, your key messaging, whatever we want to kind of focus on. And it's just essentially it's that thread throughout. So it's building that story, and we kind of go, right, we're at the beginning, we're at the middle, we're at the end, or this is where we are, this is the story we're trying to tell, this is how they're going to feel out of it. It's what, it's not all part of that. It's like what we want people to feel and do, and that side of things as well. It's essential.
Mm.
It really is, needs to happen. And I think, you say a lot of people can be scared by the word strategy. Essentially,
Mhm.
part of it is whether it is strategy, whether it's planning. different parts of that process. But it is just building that story. It's just really trying to pull everything apart, trying to understand everything, and then moving it forward to be able to go, this is going to achieve your goals by X, Y, and Z. And I think if we're all on that journey together, it just has that real clarity for everyone in that process, because there's often not, it's not, you might be having your day-to-day contact, and they understand it, but then they've got to deliver it to various stakeholders, which we might not be a part of. They're not always involved in that whole journey piece, and that can be quite a difficult, it's got to be relatable to everyone, because if you can't explain it to your stakeholders, it's not going to land with those that are attending. Or
and you touch on something there from a communication point of view that again it is really important, is not alienating a client by blinding them with terminology and your own in-depth knowledge of the industry. You never ever want to sort of make a client feel inferior, do you, in terms of their own knowledge and understanding. They brought you in as the expert, so undoubtedly they know that you're in a position of authority in that respect, when it comes to your own business. But communication to the client is really important in terms of not blinding them with terminology and making them feel inferior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why we're one team together. We're all trying to work on it. There's a whole, you might have a one-to-one contact client wise, it might just be you and one other or a couple of others, but there's creative, there's production, there's everyone behind the scenes that are working towards that, but they don't need to be a part of that because they've got their own jobs. They've got their day jobs. This is our day job. This is what we do. So it's like, trust us, but also what we do is we see it from lots of different angles as well, because we have exposure to other clients, exposure to other events, etc. So we can see what works well, what doesn't work well, what kind of suits your industry as well, and we can bring that insight. It doesn't mean that the terminology and piece and how we do it doesn't need to matter. Like, you wouldn't, it's like anything. You don't bring, you bring in the pros where you need them. If you don't, things can happen. You need an electrician for the right work, right? I'm not going to put myself in that line of
absolutely. Just when it comes to strategy, I mean, a lot of what we've spoken about today, and forgive anybody listening for sort of the path that I've maybe led Sarah down, is it feels like we're talking about individual events, but again, I hope I'm right in assuming that you will work with clients, particularly in sort of financial markets and things like that, that may organise several events a year. And is there a strategy for individual events as well as a broader strategy for clients that you're working with who maybe organise multiple events, where you want to actually take a wider, longer term view of how those events are progressing?
I think our approach is always to look at it as a campaign, as a piece. So even if it is a one day, one event thing, it's not about that. Like, it's the reach that you get beyond that as well, and what the potential is for it. And I think how we can the possibilities of all of that is how you build that strategy as well. So I think it's not always, if you've got kind of like a big roadshow, or you want to reach a global audience and you're not in that moment, there's obviously lots of different tools and various ways we can do that. But sometimes that thought process about the kind of post comms or the reach beyond it isn't always there until you're in the process, or kind of it's not really part of the brief stage a lot of the time. So again, that's kind of one of the areas we come in, is if we did, went down this avenue, what we've got is that further reach to, a wider audience. You might not use it now. It might be more appropriate in another piece of their campaign, but essentially we always look at it as that, because it's got the potential to be more. I think an event, I think events always do. That's, whatever platform you put it on, it's got that opportunity to be more and give you more from it. So why would you not want to?
In such a fast-paced environment where you're, bouncing from one event to the next event, continue always planning but always executing as well. I'm guessing there's always a full diary for businesses like yours. Do you factor in, as MD, time to actually reflect, to sit, to analyze internally your own strategies and look at what you're doing? And if so, it must be quite difficult to factor in when you are continually sort of bouncing from one event to the next.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing to do. but we do, and I think it's what, for me personally in my role, it's about having the strength of the team with you as well, to be able to give you that time. You know, we have a senior leadership team, we have the wider team that deliver on all the projects as well. And as much as I'm involved with all of those, I've got a different view to it. I think everyone knows where their focus is to be. And I think we've got that kind of collaborative communication amongst us all as well, of whether it's an idea or something you've seen, you share that, because I think communicating it, sharing it, and this can work. I think always reflecting back on what you've done. I don't think anyone delivers event and goes, absolutely nailed it, no improvements, no changes for the next one. We always kind of want to do another one, because even though no event's ever the same, you want to kind of do it again, because you're like, oh, if we'd have done this differently, it would have had this different effect. It's not about things going wrong, or, you know, don't get me wrong, they don't always go right, but you know, it's not about going wrong, but it's just like, oh, if we could have changed, if we'd have known that was going to happen, or we could have had access to this person, or we could have done that, it could have been more. But I guess, you know, that's why we do what we do, because we're always excited about the next.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't recall ever having. I can recall walking away and going, "Job well done."
Yeah.
But I mean, literally, I've got in the car or in the van after an event, you know, after a loadout, and gone, I'd have changed that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's instant. It's not even like, right, I'm going to put a bit of time aside, you know, in a couple of weeks' time to sit down and have a look at what we could have done. It is absolutely instant. It's the moment you're walking out the door, or even earlier than that. Sometimes, you know, I've been, you know, packing flight cases and going, I'd have changed that, and I've put. I'm already, and I've spoken to clients at events and said, next year we're going to do this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you plan for months, and then literally as everything's gone up, I've looked, and it never ends, does it? It's the fourth rail bridge. You know, you finish painting it, and then you just start straight back at the beginning again.
It's so true. And I think, but that's why it's so nice having that, you know, that partnership piece with your clients as well. It's not, you don't know that there's going to be another event. You're always hopeful there is going to be one, or you might have some in there. But like you say about going back to them and saying, oh, if we'd have done this, or we could do this next time. And that's always it. And that, I think that's where it shows your value, right? Because you're always thinking and you're always excited about it, because you're ready to kind of go further. And it's like, oh, I've read this about what you're doing next. We could do X, Y, and Z. You can't help yourself but share those ideas, because, you know, it's what we do. It's what we're passionate about. And
Yeah, and I don't know anybody who does it in a calculated way that says, "Oh, I'm going to say this because I think it will show enthusiasm for, and I'll get the business next year." It, I genuinely think that for people who work in the industry, it's something that they can't help but do. They can't help but see. We could have done that, or next year we could do this, and look at that, how well that worked. But we could do X, Y, and Z. And it's not a critique necessarily of something that didn't go well. It's a desire to continually improve and get better. You know, it's very much like athletes in that respect. You know, it's never quite good enough. You know, we're always looking to sort of take a step further or go faster.
yeah, so true. Probably not quite as disciplined as the athletes, but I'll take that as a comparison.
I think that the our attitude to food and beverage in the events industry is maybe somewhat different to some of the Olympic athletes that we've seen on TV recently.
That's where our
But
debrief comes in.
yeah, very much the debrief. What's on the horizon now? We're recording this for context. For you know, I often drop in as a bit of context when we're recording our podcasts. We're sort of back end of August, 22nd of August. Now, and you know, for some companies that might mean that summer's been a little bit of a you know, downtime for them, depending on the markets that they're working in. Certainly for the outdoor sort of festival and that outdoor events industry, it's still very much in peak busy season. How does the rest of the year pan out for the team at Sledge?
Yeah, it's looking good. We're kind of ready to get that September underway. Feels like it's going to be very busy, which is great, which I'm sure lots of people are saying. We've definitely had that summer of like, oh, it's gone quiet, that kind of rush just before everyone disappears. And I think I've talked about stuff before of summer seems to be getting longer and longer, the school holidays. Kind of get that brief in, you're like, oh, I'm going away, I'm back in September the 4th or something, like, oh, it's June, but fine.
Yeah, but mine are grown up now, so I've no concept anymore really of what the summer holiday is. It just I just when I leave the house in the car, that's how I know. Oh, it must be the school holidays, because
Yeah.
there's no. I could get everywhere within 5 or 10 minutes as opposed to half an hour.
Yeah.
That's the only indicator for me. Before we wrap today, Sarah, just point our listeners in the right direction. If they want to find out more about Sledge, what your team are up to, how will they find you?
Come see us on the website, sledge.co.uk. Come and look, and you can get all our social media handles from there. We're on that a lot. And yeah, come follow us, any of us.
Easy. If I have to tell people now how to find a company that we've been talking about, then again, you perhaps in the wrong marketplace. Everyone's got about 4 different devices floating around at any given time now. You could even find a company on your TV with a web browser. So go and Google them, everybody. Go and find Sledge and find out what they're up to. Sarah, it's been great to meet you. Thanks very much for taking a bit of time today to talk to us on the podcast.
Thank you.
Of course, before we wrap today, just a couple of little pointers for our listeners. If you're listening to today's podcast via your podcast audio platform, thanks very much for tuning in and giving this podcast a listen. Please do make sure that you've subscribed wherever you get your podcasts from to make sure that you get notified and updated whenever there is a new episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Please also make sure that you head over to eventindustrynews.com when you've got a minute. You can find the latest news, features, special supplements, video versions of all of the podcasts, and of course the A to Z supplier directory. If you work in the events industry and you are looking for a product or a service, the chances are you will find that on the A to Z supplier directory within eventindustrynews.com. You may have started your journey there today and watched the video version of this podcast. If you have done, thanks very much for tuning in, and please do go in the opposite direction over to wherever you can get an audio podcast from. Search for the Event Industry News podcast and make sure that you are subscribed. Thank you very much to everybody for tuning in today. My thanks again to my guest, Managing Director of Sledge, Sarah Yeats, for joining us. Sarah, enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today, and we'll see everybody on the next edition. Goodbye, everybody.